My name is Marcos. I'm 25 years old, and I live on my family's farm. I take care of it whenever my parents are away. It's not a commercial farm, just a small family property. My parents want me to take over the farm when they're too old to manage it, since I'm the eldest of three siblings and the only son. But to be honest, I don't want that. I can't see myself living there for the rest of my life, especially after something very strange happened last July. My parents went on a romantic trip for a week, so my two sisters, Carla and Maria, and I were responsible for taking care of the property. There isn't much around here, which provides a lot of privacy, maybe too much, in my opinion. That night started off normal, but got strange as bedtime approached. My sisters take online college courses. Carla was in her room doing summer assignments on her laptop, while Maria and I were watching a silly show in the living room. None of us particularly like farm life, and I especially don't, being in my early 20s. One of the scariest parts of living here is dealing with intruders. And I'm not just talking about animals destroying the crops, but also people who come to steal. Although it doesn't happen often, it has occurred a few times. That's why we keep some guns at home. Suddenly, our two dogs in the yard started barking uncontrollably, clearly terrified of something. I went outside to check what was going on. They were focused on the cornfields, barking nonstop. I shouted at them to stop, and the moment I did, they fell silent. Then, as I stood in front of the cornfield and listened carefully, I heard whistling coming from within the crops. It was definitely a person. This was the first time I had to deal with an intruder without my dad around. I ran inside, grabbed a gun, and warned my sisters about what was happening. They told me it was a terrible idea to enter the cornfield in the dark, and after thinking about it, I realized they were right. It would be too terrifying. So I went back outside, pointed the gun at the sky, and fired a shot. The loud noise echoed through the night as I shouted for the intruder to get off our property. Thinking that would solve the problem, I went back inside. My sisters laughed at my overreaction, and I laughed too, but the relief didn't last long. Soon, the dogs started barking again, even more desperately. When I went outside again, my heart nearly stopped at the sight of a man standing just a few meters away from the dogs, right in front of the cornfield. He stared at me. I shouted, and he ran back into the field. Afraid, I fired another warning shot into the sky and brought the dogs inside. I explained the situation to my sisters, and we called our dad. He told me that I was the man of the house and needed to protect my sisters, recommending that I shoot again if the intruder returned. Each of us went to our rooms, taking a dog for company. That night, I left my window open while watching a movie on my laptop. Suddenly, I heard the same whistling coming from outside. I rushed to the window and saw a figure slowly walking across the grass. As if sensing that I was watching, he stopped, turned toward me, and continued whistling. He was clearly trying to scare us, which was a terrible idea considering I had a gun. I grabbed it and fired a shot that hit the house's wall, intentionally missing. The intruder stopped his act and ran away. This time, he didn't come back. It would have been really stupid if he had. We never found out who he was or what he wanted. Maybe it was just a teenager pulling a dumb prank, or maybe it was someone truly dangerous. This story happened on my grandparents' farm in the summer of 2018. I was alone there one night because my grandparents had traveled. I was being paid to take care of the farm for a few nights. On the last night, while watching TV in the living room, I started hearing a strange noise coming from the cornfield. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming it was probably just a deer. But then, all the cows started mooing at the same time. Normally, you hear one or two cows mooing, but when they all do it at once, something is wrong. Something or someone must have scared them. Since I was the only one on the farm, it was my responsibility to check what was going on. I put on a jacket and prepared to go outside, but before I could even open the door, I heard a cow let out a high-pitched scream. I stood frozen for a moment, trembling with fear. Something was seriously wrong with the cattle. I ran to my grandfather's room and grabbed a hunting rifle he kept under the bed. I loaded the gun and stepped outside. The cows still hadn't stopped mooing. I went to the barn and looked around, but didn't see anything unusual, at least until I noticed that one of the cows was missing. I was sure it had been inside the pen the last time I checked. That's when I heard another high-pitched moo coming from the cornfield, just outside the barn. As I walked in that direction, I swear I heard human voices. I decided to put an end to whatever was happening and fired 2 warning shots into the air. Everything went silent. The cows stopped mooing and the sounds of the field disappeared. But then I heard footsteps in the cornfield. I was terrified, but I knew I couldn't just hide while intruders were on the property. This is exactly why farmers have guns. I entered the cornfield and started walking between the rows of corn. The footsteps seemed to come from all around me. As I moved deeper in, I saw a figure dressed in black standing just a few meters away. I raised the rifle and shouted at them to get off my farm. I wasn't bluffing. If I had to shoot, I would. But the figure didn't move. I fired another shot into the air. Still, they didn't react. Then suddenly, they started walking toward me with their arms slightly raised as if trying to get me to lower my gun. I pointed the rifle directly at them and shouted again for them to back off. That's when I realized the true horror of the situation. There were more of them, all dressed in black, at least 6 or 7, and they were all wearing terrifying masks. The man in front of me stopped moving, and for a moment, everything was silent. The fear I felt was indescribable. I thought I was about to be killed. Then, they started chanting in a strange language I didn't understand. It sounded like some kind of eerie ritual song. I feared they were about to perform some kind of ritual on me. I took the chance and ran as fast as I could, dodging between the rows of corn. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I fired 6 shots in their direction. I heard hurried footsteps and the sound of plants being trampled as they ran away. Finally, they were gone. As I ran back to the house, I saw something on the ground. What I saw traumatized me. A cow's head placed in the center of a circle of candles. Disgust filled me, and I threw up as soon as I got inside the house. I grabbed the landline phone and called the police, explaining everything that had happened. The dispatcher told me an officer would be on the way. After hanging up, I called my parents and begged them to come pick me up. My dad said he'd be there in an hour. I went up to my grandfather's room, where I sat trembling and crying until I heard the police car arrive. I ran outside and had never felt so relieved to see an officer. I explained everything to him, and he searched the barn and cornfield where he found the cow's head. The area was turned into a crime scene, and a search team was called in. When my parents arrived, we talked to the officer about what had happened. My grandparents took the incident very seriously and installed security cameras all around the farm. We never found out who those people were, but they were clearly performing some kind of animal sacrifice ritual. I was just unlucky enough to be the only one on the farm that night. I'd like to tell a story that happened to me in 2004. That year, I went with 3 friends to the Chihuahua Desert in Mexico to try hallucinogenic cacti. My friend Roberto and I had tried them before, but Eduardo, our third companion, had not. To be honest, we had gone 3 times before, and during my first experience, I didn't really feel the effects as I should have. Roberto was the most focused, so to speak. He went with ritualistic intentions, seeking to heal his wounds in some way with the help of what is known as local medicine. Eduardo, on the other hand, was like most people, driven by curiosity and desire to know what the experience was like. What I want to share here happened during the first and only night we spent in the desert. From the very beginning, I felt like things weren't flowing well. Eduardo took longer than we had agreed, and we ended up getting stuck in traffic on the road. We arrived at the desert just before nightfall and were only able to gather a few mescal cacti along the way. We set up the tent and wasted no time. We ate the pieces and waited for the effects to kick in. It's very common for first-timers to go through a purging process, meaning they vomit and become hypersensitive to their surroundings. Eduardo vomited, but eventually managed to calm down. Roberto and I were already used to the taste, so we simply lay down to look at the stars. One of the agreements we had made was to leave our watches behind so we wouldn't check the time. The only light above us was from the stars and the moon. At some point in the night, Eduardo asked us if we were seeing the same thing he was or if it was just a hallucination. Roberto and I sat up and saw that, about 10 meters away, there was a huge dog. I had never seen an animal of that species with those proportions. The dog stared at us intently, its eyes glowing like two burning coals. We knew there were coyotes in the desert, but that animal was not a coyote. I was absolutely certain it was a dog, black with long fur. It was the first time I felt afraid of hallucinating. "What are you seeing?" I asked Eduardo. "I see a dog," he replied. Roberto said he saw it too. That's when I was convinced it wasn't just my hallucination, but that all three of us were seeing that enormous dog. You can't imagine the fear I felt, being in such an open and vulnerable place. I was thinking about how to scare it away when Roberto said, "Look, that's not a dog." I tried to see what was happening in the darkness, and I froze when I saw the dog start walking on two legs. It didn't do so awkwardly, so to speak. It walked like a person, moving away from us. Eduardo kept asking what it was, his voice and hands trembling. "It's a nahual," I replied. For those who don't know, a nahual is a type of shaman or spiritual being capable of transforming into an animal. I had no doubt about it, not because I had encountered one before, but because, thanks to various stories and accounts I had heard, I was able to recognize it. "Let it go," Roberto said. "Everyone is on their own journey here. I think he is one of the guardians of the desert. He came to see what we were doing or if we were stealing." Something that needs to be said is that many people go to the desert to harvest mescal cacti and sell them for profit. The locals have organized themselves to control this practice and protect their traditions. I had always thought that this control referred to villagers who occasionally patrolled in pickup trucks, but at that moment I realized they also used other means, so to speak. I thought that would be the strangest event of the night, but sometime later we saw some fireballs rising and falling at a considerable height. They moved on their own, flying both in circles and in zigzags. They weren't high enough for us to say they were UFOs or something like that. I stayed quiet, waiting to see if the others would notice them too, and they did. I don't think any of us were having a good experience, but moving around in that state wasn't a good idea either, as we could end up in an accident. The only thing we did was get into the tent and lie down trying to sleep. The next morning we woke up around 10, and the mescaline's effects had completely worn off. Before leaving, we talked about what had happened. We went to the spot where the dog had been, and sure enough, there were footprints. I placed my foot next to the animal's footprint, and even then, it was about 10 centimeters larger. We concluded that the dog was even bigger than we had originally thought. We left the desert and never went back. I don't think I ever will, not out of curiosity, nor for any other reason. I don't doubt it's a good experience for other people, but for me, that last time felt like a warning.